Good evening, everyone. We're going to call the meeting to order, and we'll start with the land acknowledgement statement. We acknowledge that the ground on which we live is the traditional territory of Caldwell First Nation, of the Three Fires Confederacy, and the original people of Point Pelee and Pelee Island and its surrounding lands and waters, and that of the Huron-Wendat and Wyandot peoples. We recognize and respect the First Nations who are stewards of the land and waters of Turtle Island and who have embraced this stewardship since time immemorial. We would also like to acknowledge the contributions of other nearby First Nation communities and all original people across Turtle Island. We will now have a moment of silent reflection, followed by the playing of our national anthem. Okay, if I can get an adoption of the agenda for March 23rd, March. Am I reading things wrong? Yeah. May 23rd, 2023, of our regular council meeting agenda be adopted as presented. Councillor Riccio Spagnolo, support Councillor Carrick, all in favor? Carries. Any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Councillor Carrick.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. On item H, number 3, parents' residence on Malden Road, 6380 Malden Road. Thank you.
Any others? Okay. We can get an adoption of the minutes of a public planning meeting held on April 25th, 2023, the special closed meeting minutes held May 2nd, 2023, and the minutes of the closed council meeting and regular council meeting held on May 9th, 2023 be adopted as presented.
So moved.
Councillor Burns, support. Councillor Desjardins, all in favor? And that carries. Mayor's comments. Just a few today. On May 11th, we hosted a business networking event at the LaSalle Event Center, which was a great success, and I want to thank the Windsor Chamber of Commerce and our staff for their hard work and congratulate them on what was a really successful evening. We also just wrapped up Police Week, which also saw many residents stop in at our event center and Zayres to meet our own LaSalle Police, so thank you for hosting this event again this year. The first LaSalle Night Market of the season is coming this Sunday, May 28th from 4 to 8 p.m. and that's actually held at the Civic Center here. Our Strawberry Fest is fast approaching and we're looking for volunteers to come out to our event center on Wednesday, June 7th at 6 p.m. to clean strawberries. This is always a fun community event and we also do give high school students some volunteer hours, so we recommend coming on out and have some fun cleaning strawberries with us. Also, as we run up to the event, you will see several messages come out on our social media accounts, and the first one will be with our online ticket sales that will start this week. For more information on our strawberry cleaning and ticket sales, please visit our website or the social media channels in the coming days. We have a couple of flag raising ceremonies taking place at Town Hall. First one would be the Regional Accessibility Flag Raising Ceremony Monday, May 29th at 10 a.m. And then we also have the raising of the Progressive Pride flag, which is Friday, June 2nd at 10:30 a.m. And all are welcome to both events, and ceremonies take place at the LaSalle Civic Center. Our emergency services have events coming up in the coming weeks, and we start with LaSalle Police Services again with their 26th annual bike rodeo, Saturday, June 3rd from 10 to 1 at the Vollmer Complex. And then the following week we have Stop In for a Freezy with a Firefighter, at the LaSalle Fire Service on Friday, June the 9th from 10 to 2 p.m. And our final message tonight is just to let residents know that we will be testing the LaSalle Alert Mass Notification System on Thursday, June 1st. This system is used to provide important information in times of emergency, and you haven't already registered, please do so with your contact information to receive future text and notifications with www.lasallealerts.ca. And that's all I have for you today. So we'll move on to our presentations and delegations for this evening, which is item 1, Turkey Creek Hydraulic and Hydraulic Modeling Study. Mr. Osborne.
Thank you, Your Worship, and members of council. So tonight we have James Bryant from the Essex Region Conservation Authority with us to go over some of the results and findings from the Turkey Creek Hydrologic and Hydraulic Study. We call it H&H study sometimes as a short. I'll do just a really brief background and let James take it away. This work was initiated as a result of a H&H study that was done within the City of Windsor, by the City of Windsor. And the results of that study required some more clarity on the downstream reaches of the Grand Mare Strain, which is Turkey Creek. So through conversations with IRCA, with LaSalle and IRCA, we determined that a further H&H study would be required and modeling would be required on Turkey Creek. This project was led by the Conservation Authority and in partnership with LaSalle, Windsor, and Tecumseh. And I think I'll let James take it away from here with his presentation, and then we can go over any questions afterwards.
Thank you, Jonathan, and through you, Your Worship. As Jonathan mentioned, it's a study that kind of precipitated out of a couple of results from other things going on within the region. And what I'll do is maybe I'll start with a little bit of background on the watershed itself, with the study area, then I'll give a little bit of a timeline on the events that took place through that. So what you'll see up there, bound by red, is the entire Turkey Creek watershed. Excuse me. The area is about just over about 63.5 square kilometers, so it's a pretty sizable watershed, primarily urbanized. What you see there is the flows coming through the City of Windsor Grand Mares Channel, merging in with Turkey Creek, and then you also see some of the flows coming out of the town of Tecumseh through the Wolf Drain and eventually working its way through into the Cahill system, and then to the eventual outlet at the Detroit River. I'm not sure if the pointer can be seen. Yep, down there. So that's ultimately where all of the flows from this area is, or where they're going. Now, the City of Windsor, the actual drainage areas, you can see it's a large area. It's tough to see up on the screen with a little bit of the shadows, but there is an orange boundary line that's running through there. That's the municipal boundary dividing LaSalle, City of Windsor, and Tecumseh. So there's a huge portion there coming down from the City of Windsor, ranging anywhere from, say, 75 to 80% in terms of the total drainage area. Exact numbers are actually in the report. As Jonathan previously mentioned, there were some discussions that took place. It was near the end of 2020. And those discussions took place between municipal, our municipal partners, being Town of LaSalle, City of Windsor, Town of Tecumseh. And it was agreed that, IRCA would be in a good position to lead this study going forward, given the hydrologic and the hydraulic components of it. Shortly after that, a little bit of a surprise to us, the federal government released some funding that was pushed through Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. And that actually enabled our office to apply on behalf of the municipal partners to get some money, to get some matching funds for this work, to save a little bit of money on it. The number up there in terms of the matching funds is based on the original cost estimate for the project. So we were able to get about $182,000 worth of money through the province and through the federal government. Shortly after that, then we finished scope of work, released the RFP, and that resulted in two firms jointly bidding on this, being Landmark Engineers Inc. and Dillon Consulting Limited. We hired them to do a joint assessment because both of those firms were in a pretty unique position to actually go over and work through this study, given their history within the area. Both firms were working on different components, pieces of the puzzle within the area. So we were able to work with them and get something, kind of put all those pieces together rather than starting from scratch. So I think it was a good approach on their part and our part. And then really from then on until now, really we completed the project end of 2022. And what we're doing now is just tying everything up, doing final reporting back to the federal government, province and federal government, to get those matching funds back to the municipalities. So a high-level summary of the actual objectives, they're up there. I'm not going to go through each one, but there's a couple things of interest, being the 1 in 100-year flood flows and levels. That was an important thing that we needed to get a clear understanding of, considering we had a lot of studies going on in the area. We wanted to consolidate that information and get a clear picture of what those 1 in 100-year flood flows and what those flood levels actually are. The next one down being quantifying that overflow spill. That's a historic spill that comes out of the Cahill Drain. And we can show you where that is later on. But it's important to know where that water is coming from, how that water moves through the system, and then what flow and volume comes out of that spot, because that feeds into the Howard-Buford Master Drainage Study area. So that was an important and a key aspect of this study. Rest of them there listed, we're looking at assessing, you know, from future development, looking at potential options that, you know, might be like a regional scale in terms of some improvements that could be done through the area, but not at a detailed level. It was more so at a high level to see where could you move forward on some improvements within the system that could benefit, you know, the whole watershed. So in a nutshell, as I mentioned, there's two components of this. There's a hydrologic component and a hydraulic component. What you see an image on the top right, that's the snapshot of the hydrologic model. That's what defines the peak flows coming into the system. And that is how much of the rain actually turns into runoff and gets into the drainage scheme. So that's the quantity. And that's a piece of software that gets used to do that. You know, you discretize the area. The numbers aren't terribly important, but they're up there, 184 sub-catchments, to look at that and see what actually gets into the system. Once you know those peak flows, that gets fed into the hydraulic model, which is the bottom right image you'll see. It looks like there's some scales kind of across that. That's the basically a mesh, a 2D mesh that you'll see over the surface that was done. So that gets a little bit of a more accurate picture of what's, when stuff does spill out of a bank, of a water course, where exactly is that water gonna go? So you have that mesh, and you'll see it varies in resolution. Purpose of that is the further you get away from that drain area, the coarser, you know, it can be. Because you've already got the fine details of where the flood flows are going along the edge of that water course. So as it moves further away, you're not really into the area where the water moves very fast. You're kind of dealing with like a little bit of still standing water that will slowly drain its way back into the system. So those are the two components that get done, which is a little bit of an oversimplification, but moving into the results, the numbers are a little bit tough to see up there, but there's a few things going on here. There's a comparison between past regulatory flood flows in this case. And I think the key important factor is you'll see there's an increase in number there. So you can see there's a pretty substantial increase in some of the areas, and then some substantial decreases in some of the areas. The substantial increases are not actually saying that there's more water coming in the system as there was before. There was a technical issue years ago that kept getting carried forward time and time again that's related to a rating curve, which is basically when you got water coming down a system, there was a rating curve that was developed that said, you know, when the water's at X depth, you know, that equates to a certain number of flow coming through the system. There was a flaw in developing that rating curve done years ago that has now been corrected as part of this. And that again was one of the objectives. It was identified that that was a problem. We need to get an accurate picture of what's actually coming through here. So in real life, the quantity of water coming through has not changed per se, but on paper there is a difference because of that calculation that's now been fixed. When you also take a look at some of the lower areas, you know, we were able to do things like accounting for some large stormwater management facilities. So that's throttling back water in the system, and that equates to you know, a reduction in flow in some of those areas. So that's a good thing that you know, can be accounted for. So moving forward there, now you're seeing the regulatory flood level. So again, the hydrology gave you the flow rate. The hydraulic model is giving us what the water levels are. You know, where you have substantial flow reductions, you're going to see you know, a reduction in flood level. And then there's other areas too where you do see a marginal increase, and I've already explained why that is. The key takeaway though is that while you do get some increases in some of the areas, it's not actually adding any additional flood risk, because a lot of those areas can be you know, some of the areas may be in like the Titcomb Drain area. So it's like that's a you know, large you know, drainage feature that has, you know, provincially significant wetland. It's not, you're not dealing with development in those areas, so you're not having additional homes and buildings that are actually at risk in that case. So the numbers in some areas go up, but again, there's not an actual real additional flood risk for those areas. You'll see what I'm talking about here a little bit as I move forward. So finishing the hydraulic analysis, you get a flood level, and then the next step after that is kind of defining where that floodplain really is. So how far does that water spread out from that point? What you're going to see here is the yellow is already the existing. So that's based on the old regulatory flood extents. So there's kind of an area here that's you know, you can see Normandy, and you got, you know, some homes there that are existing, and that's always been there. That's you know, depicted from the 1982 flood levels. What we've done here is, you know, define where that floodway, you know, can be, which is kind of allowing for development in certain areas and saying, well, if this area per se up here was diked off to protect, you know, some features or protect these homes down here. If you wanted to build something in that area, we want to make sure that there's no increase in flood risk in the downstream area. So we want to remove the flood flow in this area or the flood extents in this area. How does that have an impact? And the good thing is there's very little impact and no impact downstream. So there's ways, and I'll get into that in terms of some of the improvements that can be done to still, you know, protect some of those features. But the main thing is some of those areas that did have some flood risk, they haven't really changed very much. This is an overall kind of a larger scaled out picture south of the Herb Gray Parkway. Again, what you see here are the floodplain areas and a flood fringe area that would be, you know, accounted for as being built up, protected, or developed. And then the red areas along these areas would be, you know, the defined area of a floodway where that's the main area of where the fast-moving water and the deeper water actually is. But you can see it's concentrated along the edge of Turkey Creek, not kind of out in these areas. There's some other information depicted on here. You can see the kind of, you know, turquoise or teal color down along the Cahill Drain. That's an old depicted floodway from a past study that still stands. Just kind of representing it on here to make sure that, you know, we're telling you that it was planned for, it was accounted for, you know, which would allow, again, some of these areas to kind of, you know, proceed without having any negative impacts downstream within the LaSalle area. One of the areas I mentioned was a concern was, or a priority to define a little bit better was the spill at the Cahill Drain. So you can see that's highlighted with the yellow circle there. That's the area of where that spill has always been, and that flows south into the Kennard watershed. Runs through your Howard Buford Master Drainage Study. So the key point here is just really showing that you know, there's a quantity of spill that comes out of there and a spill rate, and defining really what that is so that it can be used and planned for in your next steps with your master drainage study, which is an ongoing study. And one of those studies that precipitated this work being done that needed to be better defined. one of the questions that we were all asking, I think, is, what happens when you have something beyond that 1 in 100 year? We operate from our Conservation Authority's perspective. We regulate to the 1 in 100 year storm event, but we know we've had some issues with some larger rainfall events that have surpassed that. And what does that look like when we actually do evaluate that? Is there additional flood vulnerability, or is there additional resiliency in the system to accommodate that? Not that you would plan for it, but at least you would have an idea of what's going to actually happen. So what you're seeing up there, the color representation is really just the areas where that the August 2017 storm event was more concentrated. So it was more concentrated, higher intensity rainfall, larger depth of rainfall kind of concentrated in that center portion. And as you moved out from that hot spot, the rainfall intensity and volume was less to a certain degree. If you average it out across the entire watershed, it was probably around 150 millimeters for that storm event across that area. But when you get into the hot spot, you could be looking at 200 to 220 millimeters, which is a pretty significant rainfall. So again, we wanted to see what this looks like. So we did evaluate the storm as it actually did happen. So that was reality. We have information. We've seen the flood levels out there from the August 2017 storm. We have survey information. We know exactly really what happened out there. So we could compare that to our model, and we got very good comparable results for what actually happened in the field. The next question was, what if it happened somewhere else, right? What if the concentrated part of the storm was located in a different area? So what was done there was looking at where would it actually have the biggest impact on some of the areas in say LaSalle. How does that impact the spill? Because that water is not going to the Turkey Creek outlet. That spill, if it gets any bigger, is going to route again to the Canard and through the Howard Buford Master Drainage Study area. So that was evaluated to see what actually happens, and really. The positive thing was that downstream of the spill location, there's not much of a change. It just increases the spill. So that gives more information for the Howard Buford Master Drainage Plan to take that information and say, what do you want to do with it, right? So from it, you'll see on the next slide after this, but when we did do it, we looked at the 2017 storm again as it actually happened, and it showed very, very similar results to the 1 in 100 year. There's a reason for that, because when that's modeled, you're looking at all of the flood attenuation and all the flows running through the system in a dynamic way. So the trunk sewers can only push so much water through it. The ponds are holding a significant amount of water back. So all that translates into some attenuation and some resiliency in the system. So you'll see where those flood extents are, and they're almost overlapping, and they agreed very well with some of the verifications that were out in the field. And when we transposed the storm again, really the main impact was the spill at the Cahill, so that was increased. One of the other elements that we took into consideration to evaluate resiliency was what if the Detroit River water levels were higher? Because we went through a pretty sustained period of high water level, both Lake St. Clair, Lake Erie, and obviously the connection point being the Detroit River. What happens when that water level is at a sustained high level for months at a time? Well, we did that, and really there's a negligible impact. At the end of the day, it's really localized down in the downstream reaches. It doesn't affect the upper reaches of that watershed. So it was really of little consequence down there. But the important thing is we looked at it, and we wanted to see what does that actually mean. So the takeaway from it is that there's a lot of resiliency in the system, which is a very good thing. If you didn't have some of the ponds and some of those other features in there that were able to kind of hold back that water, things would have looked a lot worse. So what you're seeing here is exactly that. So you got the blue shaded area, that is the 1 in 100 year flood, extent. So that's what it kind of looks like from a high level. Then you see the August 2017 storm event. And what you see is a very, very, it's almost negligible. You have to zoom in to see it. So, and you can see the picture up here. So that's actual, timestamp for when that photo was taken. So The good thing is we had that actual storm event. We could calibrate the model to make sure that we know that the results that we're getting are accurate. Again, they're field verified. You can see a similar thing here, where you can see, the 100-year flood level, and then you can see the, slight little bit further of extent, again, very negligible from the 2017. So all these levels, we do have survey elevations, so again, all field verified. So moving forward to some of those opportunities, they're listed up there, all of the elements that we looked at, collectively that may, could it have an improvement on the system if some of these things were done. So they're all listed there. Not all of them actually had a real benefit, especially when you looked at the actual cost of implementing some of them. Probably the most important ones would be, number 1, number 3, and then number 5. So number 1, improving the lower Turkey Creek channel. That's really looking at cleaning out a lot of the frag built up that's down there. If cleaning out a lot of that Phragmites that's built up allows that water to flow a little bit better. There's a cost to that, of course. Constructing dikes along some of the private properties. Excuse me, there's a couple typos in there. Constructing those dikes allows for some protection to those homes that are at flood risk without having an impact downstream. So that one there probably has the best bang for buck in terms of opportunities for improvement. It's very localized, however. And then number 5, in terms of adding storage south of the Cahill spill, that's being evaluated further through the Howard Buford Master Drainage Study. What does that really add to the system? Depends on how much you can actually store, where you're going to put it, and what kind of an impact would that have on some of the proposed developments in that area. So that has to be flushed out, but it's something that's certainly beneficial. This is specifically related to Opportunity 3 that I just mentioned. So that's down in that area that I had already mentioned, this crossroad up here, Sprucewood. These are the homes that were already at risk of flooding. So this white line and this white line is kind of depicting, well, what if that area was raised up behind those properties to keep the flows from going in there? And in doing so, it enables protection for those homes. And again, no impact to the downstream area. So it's a good, bang for buck. And this is Opportunity 5 that I mentioned related to the Cahill spill. So these are the locations within the model where the actual spill comes out of the Cahill drain. And this is an area where, through others in your LaSalle administration, they're evaluating these types of things in a little bit more detail in terms of, what is that cost benefit on that. Summarizing it all, I know it's a lot of information. I'm trying not to go too fast, but there's a lot of information to cover there. The key findings being that the changes in flood flows are really there. It's a marginal impact on flood levels, and again, no increase in flood risk. There's some decreases in flows in the Len and the Cahill drain, and we've already talked about why in terms of those, stormwater management ponds that are holding back that water. That obviously equates to a decrease in that flood level, which is a benefit. And evaluating some of the larger, more extreme storm events, the Turkey Creek is, it's showing it's resilient, under those, more extreme conditions, even when you start piling them up. Higher tailwater conditions, extreme rainfall events, and then the what if about moving that storm event around into different areas to see what impact does it have and what are those critical areas. Number 4 being those opportunities for improvement. So there's some recommendations included in the report. Those 3 are mentioned in there that I've already talked about, number 1, 3, and 5. And then again, there's an opportunity to consider flood attenuation at the Cahill and West Branch through the Howard Buford study, which is really opportunity number 5. So next steps, LaSalle and others have an opportunity to use this information in those next step studies. Again, Howard Bouffard, or even any Drainage Act processes, because now we've quantified the areas that are draining into the system. We have an idea of what those apportionments actually are, which helps when you're going through those Drainage Act processes to give, proper cost apportionments. There's also a tool here that's now been made available. Again, I got a typo in there. It's been a long day already. The model is now available there, and it can be used to expedite future development proposals, right? Because we have something that can evaluate the potential impact of something. And that's actually already been used for some of the areas. And I don't want to get into it, divulging which development proposals those are, but administration knows, and we've looked at them, and we've had the opportunity to take the information from the Turkey Creek study, the tool, and say, okay, we know what actually happens with this, and that helps make faster, quicker decisions for development proposals. And in those cases, they were favorable decisions. 3, next step, incorporating this information into the Howard Bouffard Master Drainage Study, which is already being done. And then considering opportunities for improvement through those cost-benefit analysis. So with that, I'll finish off just kind of highlighting again, all the partners are on there, the 2 consulting firms, and then all the municipal partners that were part of it. So it was a pretty substantial undertaking. It seemed like it took a while, but I can, assure you that it was just about as fast as it could have possibly gone to get something like this to this level, to this standard, and taking this care. It was pretty substantial. So I think with that, I'll stop being the talking head here in front of everybody. And if there's any questions, I think Jonathan and I or any others are happy to answer.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, just really quick, thanks, James, for that presentation. Just with regards to the opportunities that Mr. Bryant presented there, with opportunity 1, that being a drain cleanout kind of in the downstream, mainly focusing on the downstream area of the creek, would likely be through the Drainage Act, as James said. It's not incredibly simple process just because of the number of homeowners and property owners in the area, and where we would have to clean is a bit of a question of, is it part of the municipal drain? Is it part of, the natural water course? So that's some of the stuff we would have to work through that Drainage Act process, but it would be our intention to move forward with that at some point in the near future. And then with opportunity number 3, with regards to berming behind, there's about a dozen properties on Normandy, that older section of Normandy that map indicated. It would likely, need to have some conversations with those homeowners, and we would need some buy-in from all the individual property owners for that to work. So doing one berm or half the berms doesn't really do anything. So that again is, if we're able to construct it, it would help those properties, but that's something we would need everyone that's involved there to be part of. So again, it might be something we can look at if we get into the Drainage Act and have those conversations, but just some other notes on that. Otherwise, we're available for questions.
Thank you. Mr. Carrick?
Thank you, Your Worship, through. So I just want to say thanks, James, and the IRCA people and all the consultants, because it was, well, quite frankly, over 2 years worth of chasing you guys around and doing the best you could do. And thank you for that. And many conversations with Peter and you guys, myself and Sue, as board members to help push this along, and you guys did an excellent job. I just have one question, I guess. Timelines around going out toward River Canard. And I know we're doing the Howard Bouffard district planning. I know we've gone through that stuff, but hearing what you said and understanding maybe there's potential for storming or ponding, or maybe more of a canal thing. Timelines or something like that again? Can you refresh my memory? I know we're working on it, but bring me up to speed on that. Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. From what I am gathering, the question really revolves around the timelines to completing the Howard Bouffard Master Drainage Study. And so we are just in the process of compiling the information from the last public meeting. Dylan Consulting is the consultant, and they are going to be working on trying to finalize that. So we hope to be in front of council with a final report sometime in July or August. for presenting the final report, and then there is a statutory 30-day review period for that type of process. That's the timeline that we're aiming for. So hopefully by the fall, we should be completed with the study. Then there's a number of other things that are going to have to follow out of that study. Implementation processes, how do we get the other partners to pay respective assessments and things of that nature. So those discussions are beginning to occur, and to see the best way of dealing with that, whether it's through the Drainage Act process or through agreements or things of that nature.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a follow-up. So just so I'm understanding, so the process is, maybe I'm not jumping the gun here, but when you come back in July or August, is we talking about what the options might be as opposed to ponding and maybe a canal or drainage? It's just so I'm clear on what direction we're going here.
When we come back in August, that will be the solution. It's how does the solution get built after that is identified. So that is the solution to deal with the spillover, as well as dealing with development in the area. Subsequently, there's also separated from this is the development solutions with respect to ponds and things of that nature. That's already been carved in stone for the developers to follow through a subsequent EA. So the solution will be completed and identified and carved in stone, or not carved in stone, but the concept will be available for us in August. Subsequently, through the secondary planning process, we will also start to identify and really refine and confirm the alignment to make sure it works appropriately with development proposals and road networks and things of that nature.
Before we move on to Councillor Reno, if Council's okay with bringing forward report I-1, which is the Turkey Creek Hydrologic and Hydraulics Modeling Study, for discussion now, since it is part of our items to be received. Is Council okay with that? Okay, go ahead, Councillor Reno.
Thank you, Your Worship. A couple questions. Jonathan, first of all, when we start talking about things that'll excite the public, these berms that are proposed, any idea what type of size that people would expect when you start talking about berms? Are we talking about 8 inches high, 8 feet high? Like what types of things should start a conversation?
James will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's more in the neighborhood of a foot or so, probably 2 feet or roughly something like that. If you look at the adjacent properties outside of those older homes, you kind of get a sense of how high a berm might be. So probably a couple feet.
Perfect. Next question. Knowing that we just went through an exercise with the Cahill drain, and I'm not sure if that work has been completed or not at this point, but those improvements that we did to increase the flow, have they been factored into this report?
Sorry, can you repeat that and just so I can wrap my head around and make sure I can unpack it?
Approximately a year ago, we had a meeting talking about improving the Cahill drain. There would be some improvements going on back around Brunette Park in this area. And knowing that Cahill is causing so much spillover, I'm wondering if our improvements are causing more problems down the road, or if you factored those new flows into this report. Is that?
Sure. Go ahead, Jonathan. Okay. Maybe I'll answer through your worship. So all of the improvements on Turkey Creek, and Jonathan, please correct me if I'm saying something that might be incorrect or out of line, but I know that there's some improvements that were done certainly, and there's other things that were associated with some of the development proposals up in the area as well in terms of some realignments. The improvements are certainly not causing a negative impact in the downstream area. The Cahill spill, the water that's coming out of that spill is coming partially from other areas upstream. And that water does partially come through, from Tecumseh. There's a certain percentage of that. So that, it's certainly not causing a negative impact. And to answer the question of have any type of actual improvements that have been made been incorporated into this model? Certainly, yes. And there's other areas that are planned for development in the town of LaSalle. And to help with some of the development approvals in those areas, we've also accounted for those areas being fully built up as well to see what type of impact that might be. Whether the trunk sewers can actually convey the water from point A to point B or not, it's kind of incorporated into this, at least as a first step, to say, if the water can get there, what would actually happen, if that makes any sense.
So just to add on to, I believe what Councilor Reynolds might have been looking for is the Cahill drainage report that we just recently did in the last few years. That was initiated from the Parkway work. But that was to get that drain just back into its regular state of repair. So that's what would have been looked at through this study. So none of those improvements or cleaning would have a negative impact on the modeling done in this exercise.
Okay, that's good. And my final question, much like that Cahill drain exercise that we went through, because this is such a long system, and this includes the Cahill, goes all the way into Tecumseh, is it fair to say, I think I saw 11% of the land goes through LaSalle, that if we do initiate a Drainage Act exercise for Turkey Creek watershed, the expenses to our residents would probably be minimal compared to the size of the system?
Yes, that would be correct.
Perfect, thank you.
Councillor Burns?
Okay, on Turkey Creek, how are you going to get rid of the Fermite or whatever you want to call that? Are you cutting it below the water level?
Through your worship, I think there's been different ways over the years, and some of them have been successful, some of them have been unsuccessful. There's been dig and dump operations, there's been cutting and spraying. You know, that wasn't really the nature of this work, though. It was just evaluating the opportunity of what if it could be removed. And I think the next step after that would be, if that's a serious consideration, and I think your administration can go through that process and work with the appropriate drainage engineer if it's part of the municipal drain to say, you know, what's the best way of actually doing that and the most cost-effective way to doing it and making sure that it works. And once you do remove it, it doesn't mean it doesn't come back. I think there's a long-term maintenance plan that needs to be considered there. But again, I'll maybe let LaSalle administration speak more on it.
Yeah, I think when we do get into appointing an engineer, we'll have to look at what options are there to get rid of the Phragmites and what kind of regular maintenance we'll have to do after we do the initial. I don't know the answer, what is the best, because yeah, if you dig it out 1 year, it's gonna come back, and if you don't touch it again for 20 years, we're gonna be in the same position, or 10 years or less. So we'll have to get into those details once we get into that process, but I don't know the magic bullet at the moment.
Follow up to that, the Friendship Church or whatever is off of Kelly Road, they brought a biologist in from Stratford. They dug it all down. That's probably 4 years ago. It's still not bad because her process was to drown it rather than try to spray it, because if you don't kill it all, it'll get spray. All it does is, it's like dandelions. You got them this year, you're going to get them next year. So I don't know which really works best, but there's an example you can look at. Is it coming back? Yes, but their plan is to drown it. So as long as the water is high, it drowns the roots and it won't come back. That's just from what I know. The follow-up question is going to be with Turkey Creek needs a lot of dredging. And in fact, there's a drain, I don't know what you call it, but it comes from Windsor across Morton in behind Ramblewood, and it's all full of dead trees. Is this going to take care of that? Or who do we call? Because one fellow asked me, and there's Fermites in there, it doesn't drain, and to me, that's just a regular maintenance, but near the park there, so I don't know who to tell them to go to. IRCA, us? Please.
Through your worship, the answer would be us, like through our, that's a separate drain, so that's not the it flows into Turkey Creek, but it's not the Turkey Creek drain, so it would be another request for a Drainage Act process and another Drainage Act report to do the cleaning of that. Because again, like this drain, a lot of that water does come from Windsor, so we'd want to be able to properly assess that to Windsor.
Just to follow up, why can't we go in and just take the dead trees out of it?
We have adopted using the Drainage Act process. We can do emergency maintenance if there's something blocking. If there's something that needs to be done immediately, yeah, we can go do that. But for a whole drain clean out, we do have to follow the process, the Drainage Act process.
Is that the Tettenham drain or whatever, that one from Windsor down there?
Yeah, Ojibwe drain sounds.
Ojibwe?
sounds
Okay,
right.
thank you. The other thing is along Turkey Creek after the last storm, and I believe we own the property, there's all kinds of dead trees down there. So would that go to you as well, Jonathan, through the mayor? I will have them call you. Thank you, sir.
Councillor Reno.
Thank you. Just supplementary in support of what Mr. Burns was saying. I did have an opportunity to speak to the biologist who was in her little robot boat out behind that church when she was doing the work. And I would highly recommend that when you get to that point, you reach out to the church and find out if they're happy with the work that was done, because it seemed very good what she was doing at the time, but I have not been back there to see the results. But I would second his motion to speak to that church.
Any other questions or comments? None? I have one. It had, opportunities for improvement, evaluating costs. Those are all great opportunities for improvement. Are those costs all borne on LaSalle residents, or is that also part of that cost recovery with Windsor-Tecumseh?
The items I mentioned, number 1 and 3, so the drain clean out, and that would be assessed to all property owners. So a good chunk of that would be from Windsor and Tecumseh. The number 3 with the berm along the back of those properties, that one could, it really is more of a benefit really to those properties. So it would likely be the cost to those residents. And then when it comes to the spill that at the Cahill drain going into Howard Bouffard, how that cost gets assessed out is really another discussion, and that's really going to be, as Mr. Maher mentioned, kind of flushed out as part of the Howard Bouffard Master Drainage Study and what happens after that. So that answers your question.
So for anything from now until then, we don't really have a mechanism to recoup any costs at this point that we've, as the town of LaSalle, put into it? Or is that like a policy that has to be created?
No, we would, once we initiate the Drainage Act process, if we wanted to do the clean out, that mechanism is in place just to keep following the Drainage Act process and then do the assessment through that. It's the opportunity 5, the one that deals with Howard Bouffard, that's kind of a different thing that's going to be handled through kind of a separate process. So.
Thank you. Mr. Maher?
Just to build further on your question, Madam Mayor, in the answer, with respect to initiating things within the drains, should we get direction from council to do so, we can certainly do so. Again, that would be at the cost of LaSalle taxpayers and things of that nature. For example, just going to remove trees. Well, we need to get access across private property in order to do that, so we need to give that type of process. And then when we get in to remove the trees, well, why don't we dig this and dig that? And then all of a sudden we start to do work, and once you start doing work without the proper assessment, you cannot go back later and assess. So you have to follow the process properly in order to be able to assess upstream landowners. For years, LaSalle has just done work and not assessed the landowners upstream through the Sandwich West Act is what the LaSalle used to use. So that is the process of why we decided that we need to go through the Drainage Act, because there is an extensive amount of work that needs to be done, and we need the people who are contributing water to these watersheds and into these drains to pay their respective share, and the only way to do that legally is through the Drainage Act process. So that is the reason why we've transitioned into the Drainage Act process as we are today.
Thank you. I appreciate that explanation, because I think all of council feels the same way, that we would prefer to go through the Drainage Act to be able to recoup those costs. Anything else? thank you again for the presentation. If I can get, I guess just a motion to receive, good? Just a motion to receive the report this evening.
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Burns, support by Deputy Mayor Pata. All in favor? That carried. Thank you again very much for joining us.
Thank you.
We have no public meetings in our hearings, so we're going to move on to H1, which is reports and correspondence for council's action. Number 1, amendments proposed to the vehicular parking and clean yard bylaws, and that's Mr. Burgess.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. The report before you outlines amendments and changes to the vehicular parking bylaw and the maintenance of property bylaw. The changes are to both bylaws that are being proposed are to enhance the bylaws for the staff to be able to enforce the provisions of each of these bylaws. The bylaws are on the agenda, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. Members of council, do you have any questions? Councilor Renaud?
Thank you. Alan, you know, usually when we have a change to a bylaw, we usually, or correct me if I'm wrong, but usually we see what things have been taken out and what things have been enhanced. We see like a redaction section and then the new things written in maybe in blue or something. I don't see anything like that this time. And it scares me a little bit knowing that we're going to employ more of the AMPS program, which has caused a little bit of heartache in the town in the last little while. And I'm just wondering if we were to hold off until we could get those to be a little clearer to council before we approve something, to be able to see what's changing, because with the AMPS program, you know, when it first rolled out, you know, a year and a half, 2 years ago, you know, it seemed like it was something just to deal with parking at the Volmer, but now it's growing into something bigger, and it's going to be dealt with these bylaws. And I'm just wondering if that's something that could be provided to council.
Through your worship, we could provide a more detailed report if council wishes and outline each of the changes. I think what you're referring to was a working copy that we used to use at the bylaw committee. And in that working copy, we would have outlined where changes were being made, where the bylaw that's before you this evening is a final version of the bylaw, which is available for adoption.
So was this vetted through the bylaw committee with all those changes?
There is no longer a bylaw committee to vet it.
So I understand what you're asking for, because I did the same thing. I went and pulled up the bylaw and I tried to understand where the changes were, and I did struggle myself. So if you would like to put a motion forward to defer and receive a report from administration regarding the changes in the bylaw, we could do something like that if you're interested.
Well, that sounds great. I would like to defer this until we could get a working copy.
I'll second that.
All in favor? And that carries. Item 2, council conference and training expense reimbursement policy.
Thank you, Your Worship. So tonight you have before you a recommendation from administration to replace the old council, what was it called here? The council compensation and travel policy be replaced with a revised policy called the council conference and training expense reimbursement policy. As you are likely aware, many of the policies that council has adopted go through regular cyclical review periods. And as part of this review, administration is recommending a replacement and separating out council compensation for attendance at meetings and the compensation associated with your regular duties in meetings, with a policy separating that from the expense reimbursement that council gets for attending training and conferences. So what we did was we took the framework that was in the original policy and largely used that framework to create a policy that was a little bit easier for administration to implement and was a little bit more up to date with the current processes that we utilize for council to receive reimbursement for expenses. The changes to the policy have been outlined in the report So we've updated the stipends and laid out in a little more organized format what expenses council would be reimbursed for. We've clarified that the budget funds established during budget approval would be distributed evenly amongst council members, which may necessitate, and I know the deputy treasurer is here, so he'd be able to speak to how they would process that. So we may need to adjust how council budgets for conferences for council each year, because what we are going to do is, the intent is to apply all the expenses associated with attending conferences. So your travel, the daily, the reimbursement, the daily stipend, all of that would go toward that budget. And then we would also, so we would clarify that and make sure that it's distributed equally amongst each council member. We would also make, lay out the roles and expectations of members and staff with respect to the policy. So currently, council submits an electronic form, and we would keep track of all the expenses that are accumulated under this policy. The two things that we do need direction on, or the one thing we need direction on, and the one point that we want to bring to council's attention is, if this policy is adopted, it would be difficult for us to adhere to the policy as it's written for this year, just given the timing of when we are implementing it in terms of conferences that have already been booked and attended by members of council. But there is a process whereby some municipalities set out an approved conference listing. Currently, the town of LaSalle does not have an approved conference listing for members of council to attend. So we are able to book council or members for whichever conference they wish to attend. However, if council wishes to establish a listing of approved conferences, that's something that we can bring back at a future meeting. So subject to any questions, the recommendation this evening is to replace the current policy with the draft policy that's in the agenda package.
Thank you. Members of council, questions? Councillor Burns.
I have one question. So I'm traveling to Toronto, and unfortunately, somebody hits me, and you're saying that I got to go through my insurance? Because I'm on town business, I think the town should pick up the deductible. I think that's only fair, because you have it lined out, you have it for a rental, you will.
So the provisions of the so those provisions specifically are the same as what currently exists in the policy as it is written today. But I will defer to legal counsel on that provision, because we did vet those provisions through legal.
And then I would ask one other question is, are we or are we not, when we're traveling on town business to a conference, are we covered by workman's comp?
I will
Because
defer.
I mean, it doesn't affect me because I'm a retiree, but people that are working, they're not going to cover them for your income.
Yeah, I would have to look into that further. That's not really my area of expertise, but I could get back with an answer on that.
You know, as a retiree, it doesn't affect me, but anybody who is gainfully employed is now going to be out of his or her salary, because as my primary wage earner, I'll use the old company I work for, Reimer Express Lines, they wouldn't cover my wages. They won't put me on short-term or long-term disability. They'll say you were on company business for another company, and it's their responsibility. So I don't know where we are in that. I know at one time we were covered, and I think we should be the same as any other employee traveling. Mr. Militia's next to me, so if he's traveling to Toronto and he's in an accident, it's not his fault. He's going to go off on S&A. So I think council should be covered for that, because it would be S&A on our salaries, not S&A on what we made at the primary one. So it'd just be something that I think is fair and equitable for those members who are, they'll be left with nothing, no income.
Okay.
Those are the only 2 points that I have. Other than that, I think it's well-written, and I personally like the fact that, and I did question the CEO about receipts, because I think at some point we open ourselves up, if we don't have them, to a liability to say, you've taken A and you have not proven that you've used that money for the described purpose it was issued, especially meal allowances. So I thank administration for the policy, but I just would like clarification on that, those 2 points. Thank you.
There we go.
If I if I recall, I believe that we did, again, just dealing with the workers' safety and insurance board or workers' comp. I believe we did review that some years ago, and council would be treated as an employee at that point. But we will confirm that. Again, we will come back to council and confirm that number. But that language, I think, is consistent with the previous policy, which I think that was a question of that time, and that was some 7 or 10 years ago. So I believe that's what the answer was, but we'll need to confirm that. And again, with respect to the deductible on a personal vehicle, certainly, again, that's existing language in the policy. It has been for some time now. And so if, in fact, and again, that applies to members of council as well as any staff using their own personal vehicles to travel to a conference. That is not included in the reimbursement. If council wishes it to be included, they just need a direct administration for us to include it, and we will. I would also say, though, that the mileage allowance is meant to cover things like that. Now, whether that's fair, right, or not, that's a whole other conversation. All I can tell you is that that's what it's meant to do. If council would like us to include that in the policy, we certainly can. It's just we need direction. We were following the existing language when it comes to that particular aspect.
Councillor Burns, did you want to add on that?
Follow up. Well, as an example, I went to Toronto, and I think my deductible's $500. I think you need to set some kind of a thing if we're going to adjust that. I don't want to see the town have to pay $2,000 deductible because someone wants a $2,000 deductible. But that trip to Toronto, I was reimbursed $385 as an example. So it wouldn't cover fuel, wear and tear. I don't mind eating, but it certainly wouldn't cover my deductible. So I just point that out as, it covers the fuel and wear and tear, but it does not, in my opinion, do that. And whatever council wants to do on that, I just want to point it out so that at the end of the day, someone doesn't say, well, we didn't know. Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Carrick?
Just a couple of things, I guess, to Mr. Burns' point there, well, as far as mileage and that stuff goes, I guess we could always take the train. We don't have to drive or take some other form of transportation to avoid that kind of issue. I guess my question is the number of conferences and what the allotment is, because sometimes it gets blurred. Do I got 2? Do I got 1? And with the next budget session, we will look at what a lump sum is, but I would be more interested in making sure that at least AMO is automatically covered, no matter what, and then anything else over and above that could be separated from that, and I would like to see that as part of what we do, because that's the most important conference we go to is AMO, right? So that's what we deal with. So I would like to see that could be just a conference that we go to over and above something else, so that it's separated, because I get the end of the day, that's our conference. That's what we should be going to. And if we choose to go to Parks and Rec, or if I want to go to Good Roads, then that's my second one, or something like that in the budget numbers. And I know we probably have to account for that in the budget itself, but I think we should be at least allowed to go, if I go, say I went to Good Roads, now I'm going to AMO, I want to be allowed to go to AMO for sure. And if Good Roads would have been my second option, but I went there first. So I'm not double dipping or going to 3 or 4, but at the same time, if I go to 1, I still want to be guaranteed I can go to AMO because that's our most important conference. So if that makes sense, what I'm saying here, that makes sense to me, that at least if we go to an extra one, then that's okay too. But I get into the numbers, but at least AMO is covered. And that's, like I said, the most important one for us.
I think as of right now, if I can get clarification, in our budget, is it 35,000? So technically, each council member should have $5,000 to put towards conferences each year if we were to follow the process of equal spending on conferences. Is that correct?
Your Worship and members of council, that is correct. The budget is $35,000 in 2023. And certainly if we divide it by the 7 of you, and it would be $5,000 each. So certainly when we're bringing forward next year's budget, we can review the cost or the average cost of going to the AMO conference and then building the budget, what we bring forward from that as well.
Your worship, I'd like to see something like that, because at the end of all, if I want to get to a second conference that would help and benefit me outside of AMO, then I want to be able to choose to do that, so I'd like to see that in the budget.
I think, I appreciate what you're saying. I think getting an idea of what the cost is for AMO would be helpful, but I think that falls well within the $5,000 and still leaving you enough to go to another conference. But the numbers would definitely help us to be sure that that's what we follow. But I think personally, out of this report, I think the budget's probably the important part that we've been lacking for the few years because of COVID and everything else. We didn't attend many conferences, so truly we don't know what the cost is for us to attend multiple conferences. So I'd like just to be sure that, next year, obviously we can approve this policy now, but it won't be implemented until next year just because of how many conferences have already taken place. But I'd like to see us more have just a budget, and I don't really want to say you have to go to AMO because No, I know you're not saying you have to, but I don't want to say like, this is only money for AMO. I want to, here's your 5,000 and you pick your 2 or 3 conferences that you feel are important. And I like the idea of a list of conferences, but not for an approval process as much as just so we know what our options are. But I don't want to tell everyone what conferences they feel are more important than the others. I'm personally not interested in that, but it's up to you guys what you think. Councillor Burns?
Well, over the years, I think we had $5,000. If you overspend, the town doesn't pay. It's as simple as that. I mean, the allotment can be, and again, I agree with you, Your Worship, that, I probably in my 24 years went to FCM maybe 4 times, because I don't think going because it's in Banff, or Vancouver, and the taxpayer should pay for all of that. I think, that, and I find that I didn't get much out of those conventions, but I don't mind going once in a while just to hit the, maybe once a term I go to that. And then the other ones, you want to hit different ones. I wouldn't go to Good Roads every year either, as an example, but once maybe every 4 years, or it's good to choose a different one. But the allotment, I think, it should be written in the budget. It's X number of dollars. If you want to go to AMO and spend 10 grand, well, or in FCM and you're overspent, we take it out of what we get paid. I think that's only fair. I mean, and we've dealt with this in the past. That's why we came up with a number, because again, some people thought that it was unlimited, I think, at the time, but maybe Ms. Gisardi can help me with that. But we had to address it, and you say, here's your allotment, end of story.
So,
yeah,
sir, I get all that, but at the end of the day, still, I want to make sure I can go to AMO if the option is there, and I don't want to have to be worried about being $500 over, is my concern. So I want to look at it in the budget. I think that'd be necessary, so that we can have that option to look at over and above. I don't want to not go somewhere else because I have to put $500 in my pocket when I got to take time off with no pay. So I just want to make sure that, and it benefits me to do my job better. So I get nickels and dimes and being a flat line, and we're all about that. But if I can go to something that makes me a little bit better at what I do for a little bit more money, then I want to at least look at that option. That's all. I'm not saying it's guaranteed, but I want to at least look at that option to see what comes forward in the budget session. We can say yea or nay at that time, but at least I'd like to have that option.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. Mr. Mulshaw?
So just perhaps for council's information, again, the number, the $35,000 allotment in the budget has been the same probably for the last 5, 6, 7 years, I would say for sure. And what we have seen is that the cost escalation, just on, again, the reimbursement of mileage alone went from 35 cents probably 7 or 8 years ago to now it's 55, 6 or 7 cents, whatever it is per kilometer. So again, just on that side alone, there has been an increase. We have both the Director of Council Services and I, we did look at what an AMO cost would be, because we understand that most members of council, not all, but most members of council will attend that. And the $5,000 just barely makes AMO. And so if you're looking to do AMO and another conference of some sort, doesn't matter of whatever magnitude that might be, you're likely going to be over your allotment. And that's when we were starting to look at this policy, realizing that our budget number has not kept up with it. I will say on the other side, particularly in the last couple of years, but even through the pandemic, but even before, we never, quite honestly, I can't remember the last time we went over budget in that line item, because invariably, members of council work, have lives, believe it or not, beyond this place. And so the availability of going to a conference on that much, we've usually been under budget, despite the cost escalations being what they have been. We've been under budget almost every year, just because councillors can't go to every one of those conferences because their life gets in the way. And so I think from that perspective, but we are, our plan again, and as was noted, the plan is that we're going to adjust the budget going forward so that we can account for that framework that Councillor Carrick spoke of, what is AMO cost, and then what is one other reasonable conference cost would be, and then that's what we'll budget for. It will be more than the 35,000 or 5,000 per member, but that's just part of, again, we view it as training, again, from an internal perspective. On a staff basis, we have a budget allocated for training, and we see that budget increase every year because we have to do more and more training. It's just the way it is. And so we don't want to shortchange council because they have an important role, and I think the conferences, again, have that value that is brought to members of council. So we will be doing that, but the cost is likely going to be higher than the $5,000 per member or $35,000 total, just because cost escalations are what they are. And the last point I'll make is that, again, we have been asked by members of council, sometimes when they're new to the council table, what conferences can I go on? And that's where the thought was, if we can have, some municipalities have for lack of a better term, an authorized conference and seminar list where council can pick and choose what they want from that list. And others are like us that have a more open-ended policy where, if it's something that you deem as value, then you would decide on that and go through that process of booking and things of that nature. So again, we're open for any questions, but again, the policy has been updated for some time, and we thought it was time to take a look at that and update it accordingly.
So just for clarification, if we were to receive the new bylaw, repeal the old one, can we do the policies, without setting a budget? That would be added to it at a later time? That'd be okay to do it that way? So if we were to receive the new policy being presented without a budget line item, because we don't know what we're approving, that's okay, we can add that afterwards, or do we have to defer the policy itself?
No, I mean, we're currently operating under the framework that exists as it is now. And so the intent of this policy is to establish, to clarify what the expectations are for council members in attending conferences and what's covered. And then for 2024, we would implement the budget, I'll call them restrictions for lack of a better term, so that we can set the budget when we go into budget deliberations in December this year or end of November. And then everybody knows going into 2024, this is your budget allocation for attending those conferences. So yeah, you can certainly approve the policy tonight, and we'll replace it, and we'll move forward for 2024, adhering to the best of our abilities to it now, but without worrying about those budget restrictions strictly.
Okay. Yep.
We would never want to, our preference would be not to put the budget number in the policy, because the budget number will have to be adjusted, and we'll probably try to keep our eye on that as we go through every couple of years, adjust it for the cost escalations.
So besides the few comments Mr. Councillor Burns had earlier that we'll hopefully get clarification on, if everyone's okay with what's presented this evening, there's a recommendation in front of you that the council conference and training expenses reimbursements policy be received, and that council adopts the council conference and training expenses reimbursement policy and repeals the council compensation and travel policy.
So moved.
Okay.
Recommended.
Support Councillor Desjardins, all in favor? And that carries. Okay. Malden Road Phase 1 detailed design assignment. Yep. Mr. Osborne.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. So tonight we're looking for council's approval on assigning Stantec Consulting the detailed design work for Malden Road reconstruction, this Phase 1 portion of it. As well in the work is some preliminary investigation of the Phase 2 work. If Stantec has done the Malden Road environmental assessment, and so they have extensive background and knowledge on the project. If council gives the approval tonight, detailed design would be carried out in 2023. We would get into property acquisition later this year and into next year, as well as some utility relocations next year, and hopefully road reconstruction in 2025. And I'm available for any questions.
Members of council, any questions, comments? I do have one. It says to Malden Road, and I know we're going to get this question from residents, from up to Ream Road, and then Phase 2 is Ream on. Where does that place the actual Ream intersection, in Phase 1 or Phase 2?
Phase 1, we say we kind of use Ream just generally to give people an idea, but really it would probably go just beyond the Ream intersection to include that intersection.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? So the recommendation is that the report of Director of Public Works dated May 4th, 2023 regarding the Malden Road Phase 1 detailed design assignment be received, that council assign the detailed design work for the reconstruction of Malden Road Phase 1 Stantec Consulting for a price of $567,653.85, and that the Director of Finance and Director of Public Works be authorized to execute the required documents to give effect to this approval. Moved Deputy Mayor, support Councillor Reno, all in favor, and that's carried. Item 4, Woodview Phase 1 Draft Plan of Subdivision, Mrs. Baggs.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of council. We are in receipt of a draft plan of subdivision application for Phase 1 of the Woodview Estates Plan of Subdivision. As you will recall, we had a public planning meeting on April 25th to hear about the rezoning application associated with this file. So this isn't essentially anything new, but this is the report that provides a recommendation in support of the draft plan of subdivision application. Next slide, please. So I wanted to use this opportunity to sort of highlight for council some of the process changes as a result of the Provincial Bill 23 that was put in place early this year, and how this has affected this Planning Act process. So this will be the first application that we see through this amended process. So I wanted to use this as an opportunity to really clarify for council what this means. And so Bill 23 adopted some changes to the draft plan of subdivision process requirements. So the new amendments associated with the Planning Act under Bill 23 eliminated the need for a public meeting associated with the draft plan of subdivision. So that's why you're seeing this report as a standalone report to council with a recommendation from administration and not in conjunction with public statutory meetings. So we did our public statutory meeting as part of the rezoning process. We satisfied that statutory requirement. And then in an effort to build more homes faster, the province eliminated the need to have a public meeting requirement or a statutory public meeting associated with a draft plan of subdivision application. So that statutory public meeting requirement for the rezoning is still in place, and we held that April 25th last month. And so what we will be looking for tonight as part of this report is a council resolution in support of the draft plan. That is still required under the Act, so that still stands. And so as part of that, the County of Essex remains the approval authority for plans of subdivision. They still issue draft plan approval with all the accompanying conditions. That provision and that requirement is still intact. And the developer is still required to enter into a subdivision agreement with the municipality, and that agreement gets registered on title with all of the planning and engineering requirements and standards associated with our, municipal operation. and approved by council by way of a bylaw at a later council meeting. Next slide, please. So with that, hopefully that provides a little bit of clarity on the process. This is the project site location. It is essentially bounded by LaSalle Woods Boulevard to the south, and Disputed Road to the west. There's a number of undeveloped green fields to the south. And phase 1 of Woodview essentially stops at just south of Chestnut Street, which is the intersecting street of LaSalle Woods Boulevard to the north. And currently the property is vacant farmland. Next slide, please. The property is, when this presentation was prepared, the property was zoned deferred urban, but now the municipality has fulfilled that statutory public meeting requirement. We've taken the bylaw at the May 9th meeting of council, and that has been approved. So the property is now zoned residential 2, which will allow a mix of single and semi-detached dwelling units to facilitate this development proposal. Next slide, please. So this drawing here showcases the plan of subdivision proposal. It shows a total of 64 dwelling units on 9.2 hectares of land. The applicant is proposing 46 new single detached units with 18 semi-detached units. And they've identified block 50 there, which is for stormwater management and flood inundation purposes. The proposal is consistent with the provincial policy statement, in keeping with the municipal and county official plan, and is now zoned to permit the proposed development. The proposal will be serviced by municipal storm, sanitary water, and they have made a special provision for the flood inundation area, which that concept has been reviewed and approved by the Conservation Authority. Next slide, please. And so I also wanted to take this opportunity to provide council with a bit of a framework on how we are, or how we have been evaluating these development proposals in these greenfield areas prior to initiating the secondary plan study. So I know there was some discussion about you know, is this proposal in essence, should it be part of the secondary plan area study? And so this is some of the criteria or the framework that is codified in our official plan that lays out sort of the groundwork for administration to review and accept development applications. And so essentially it says growth shall occur in a comprehensive, logical, efficient, and fiscally responsible manner. The primary factors to consider through the review of applications for new development include the integration of new development within the planned community infrastructure, the provision of adequate municipal infrastructure, so storm, sanitary water, parks, and other community facilities, the provision of adequate transportation facilities, so trails and road network, and the appropriate protection of the natural heritage system. So if one or more of these criteria cannot be addressed to the satisfaction of the municipality, the processing of the application may be held in abeyance until such time as all of the criteria have been addressed. So administration on this proposal has gone through to understand and have comfort that all of these provisions associated with this specific policy in the OP have been satisfied. So we are comfortable on the strength of the fact that, you know, this proposal has satisfied this criteria, that we can move forward and provide that resolution in support to county. Next slide. So the recommendation tonight would be to receive the report, for council to pass a resolution in support of the application in accordance with the draft plan drawing that was prepared, subject to the conditions that have been established in the report, and that a copy of this resolution be forwarded to the County of Essex for draft plan approval issuance. And I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, members of council. Councilor Renham?
I just wanted to thank Ms. Beggs. I feel that this report is probably the most comprehensive we've seen in a long time. It's gone through everything from the IRCA comments, the comments from the school board. I mean, we really do have a chance to see it all, and it's very transparent, so I want to thank you for that. And I did have one question, it's probably more for Jonathan. Jonathan, will this be going into the Cahill again?
No, this is not in the Cahill drainage area. This is in the Howard Bouffard area. It is out of the flood inundation zone, and the storm area they've identified on that image you saw, it would be the temporary inundation area for just this phase of the development.
Any other questions or comments? There being none, don't make me read all 10 approval conditions, please. Fantastic. So we have a mover and support by Councillor Carrick. All in favor? And that carries as well. So item I was information items to be received. We already did item 1, so that leaves just 2 items to be received. If you would like to speak on any of the items, please let me know. Otherwise, we can just approve them all. Anyone want to speak? You move? Support? Councillor Carrick? The only one I did want to mention, and we haven't had much of a chance to review, is item 2, the Oxford County Resolution Support of Bill 5. I don't know if do we need approval first before we discuss that? Okay, so we'll finish if everyone's good for receiving, all in favor of that? Okay, so Bill 5, and I don't want to put anyone on the spot, however, this has been discussed at the county, and I believe at the last meeting, correct me if I'm wrong, we did support and send it to all the municipalities. And I don't know if anyone's had a chance to really look into what Bill 5 means, and maybe if I could get a little assistance from our Human Resources Department to explain maybe our current policies we have in the town of LaSalle and how this may differ. Sorry for putting you on the spot.
Thank you for the question, Madam Mayor. With Bill 5, it is a bill that's currently within the province of Ontario. It has passed the first reading. To the best of my knowledge, it has not been scheduled for a second reading. So Bill 5 talks about stopping harassment and abuse by local leaders. And the difference between Bill 5 and some of the policies that the town of LaSalle has in place with respect to workplace harassment, violence in the workplace, and some other of the training modules that we provide members of council and all staff members, is Bill 5 clarifies a method in which how to remove members of council from council for abuse of acting in an abusive way towards employees, other members of council, because right now there isn't a method of holding members of council accountable based on some of the language that we've some of the research that has been done, and that the province, I believe itself, struggles with a method of dealing with this. So Bill 5 is fairly comprehensive in what its requirements are, and where there would be an actual court procedure that would take place, presided by a judge, to oversee whether or not there's support or grounds sufficient to remove a member from council, and to then, if that is sufficient to meet those grounds, then there would be, the member of council would be replaced as per any of the bylaws that we have in place at the town of LaSalle, whether an election is held or whatever the various timing of when such an event may or may not occur. So it is more comprehensive than our policies that we do have in place. And Bill 5 does take it a step further in removing members of council from their elected seat. So that would be a short version of a summary of what the bill entails.
Thank you. I appreciate the explanation. I don't think I could have explained it quite as nicely as you did. So at the county level, we did support this, as well as AMO is currently trying to do something on their level as well. And we realize that when bills are put forward, they're not necessarily going to go anywhere. But we thought it was really important to show our support to other communities who were really in need of a bill like this. And not that we don't need it here. I mean, everyone should be following the same policies and procedures. But there are some areas who really could use this kind of thing put in place in their municipalities. So I would like us to see us support this. I don't know if you want to discuss the bill any further, or if you would like more clarification before we do. But I think it's important that we receive this and support.
I would make that motion to receive and support.
Thank you. And Councillor Regis-Bagnall, all in favor? Thank you very much. And the very last thing we have, well, not last, but we have bylaws. We only have 2 bylaws now. We will no longer be doing the last 2 listed. So the following bylaws be given a first, second, and third reading and finally passed would be 8793, a bylaw to repeal bylaw 5778, and then 8796, a bylaw to authorize the execution of memorandum of understanding with Joseph Dante DeMarco and Kimberly Joy DeMarco. Yes.
5778, is that the council bylaw, or is that the one, which one is that, Dom?
So that was actually an encroachment agreement that we entered into 20 some odd years ago with a property that we've since brought back into our name. There's no longer an encroachment, so we've actually made it part of Malden Road, and this just formally gets rid of the encroachment agreement and the bylaw that went with it at the time.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. I was just getting caught up in what we were repealing with the other 2 bylaws. So thank you very much.
So if I can get first, second, third reading and finally passed. Councillor Desjardins, Councillor Reno, all in favor? And that carries. Committee matters. Any items? So we had the Parks and Rec Events Committee matters. So we just need to approve the amendments to facility rentals, ice surface use policy, and LaSalle Affordable Recreation Policy as recommended by the Parks and Rec and Events Committee at its meeting held October 6, 2022. Do we do that separate from the next one? Okay, so if we can work with that one first. Moved by Councillor Carrick, support by Councillor Regis-Bagnall. All in favor? And then item 2 was the County of Essex County Council highlights for May 3rd. If you had a chance to review those, we just need to receive them. Councillor Desjardins, support. Deputy Mayor, all in favor? That carries. Questions and statements by council members. Councillor Reno, and then Deputy Mayor, and then Councillor Desjardins. And then I'll look to my left.
Thank you. Question is probably for Joe. Knowing that we've had a little bit of turbulence in our community over the AMPS program and over some bylaw resolutions that have come down, I understand that we are scheduled to take a look at our animal bylaw in the next year. I'm just wondering if there's any timeline as to when that may be coming to council with any types of changes.
At this point, again, we can report back to council, and we'll get some information as to when that's in part of the schedule. It is part of the schedule, as I think part of the 2023 review of that bylaw. So we can get back to council on that. I would say, though, that from I may not use the word turbulence in terms of the AMPS program. The AMPS program is meant to do exactly what it does, and that was a program that was adopted by council. If council doesn't want to do the AMPS program, certainly that's something that council can discuss, but certainly the idea, and again, what you saw, and we can provide some more information in terms of the before and after view of the bylaws that were discussed earlier in the meeting, but the AMPS program streamlines the process and makes things easier. Folks may not like the results, and I think that's what's happened recently, but it is meant to make things easier from a processing perspective, and ideally meant to effectively deal with our bylaws the same way we deal with the Highway Traffic Act for speeding tickets. That's the whole purpose of it, is that, you know, council is the legislative authority which creates the rules, and then we have another process in which implements rules and enforces those rules. So from that perspective, certainly it's within council's preview to review all the rules, if you will, and part of that bylaw review will be the animal control bylaw. I don't know if we have a date at this point. I'm just looking at the director at this point, so we can come back with a date in terms of when we believe that'll come back to council.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to the two chiefs. Chiefs, I attended what was Police Week at Front Road, and I saw the fire department there, and I must say I was impressed by the setup. And as a former copper, let me tell you, LaSalle Police Service punches way above their weight with the 50-some-odd members we have, with the display that was there, how they're interacting with the public, and everything I saw. So kudos to you and the officers that organized it, because Chiefs, I know that as the head of the organization, you delegate, and I just wanted to let you know that the time that I spent with the men and women of both your services was well done. And to the recreation folks, wow, did the setup on Front Road ever look outstanding. Even the comments that I got from 31 Division, never having been there, the Good Intention Ferry flew in, and I will be writing some stuff up to submit to Her Worship about some ideas that came through that may be something that we could do there in the future. But I just wanted to say that the setup was outstanding. The attendance, when I was there, I saw our folks talking to a number of interested people, so it did what it was supposed to do, and I just wanted to say thank you.
Councillor Desjardins.
Thank you. Through you to, I think, probably Jonathan, just because of calls that I've had over the last couple of days, and I probably put my foot in my mouth, but I've suggested that with it becoming nice weather, we're going to be changing the schedules for cleaning up garbage and stuff in the parks. Apparently we have some issues with garbage, and I know it's springtime, so there's lots more. So will we be changing out the schedules for pickup?
Thank you for the question. I'll have to review that with our Parks Department, and I know that there had been an issue over the last weekend, and so we'll look at that and see what specific spots were a problem and look at our schedule. If it needs to be adjusted, we can do so.
The one that came up in particular was Burnett Park and some critters that people are not happy about seeing in the park. Okay, thank you. I said we'd take care of it.
Any other questions or statements? I have a question, and I really didn't want to have to ask it, but I've received too many calls not to. The Michigan Maple intersection. I'm sure you guys have received some calls and questions on that one as well. We're changing the direction of stop signs from Michigan to Maple. Is that right? I did that right? I think I did. The question I'm getting is, why are we not just making it a four-way stop?
Thank you for the question, and yes, we have gotten calls on it. I asked our staff today if we had any calls that anyone liked it, and they said no. But we're changing it to it's this two-way stop, but we're reversing it based off of the engineering data. That's really why we're making the choice, and that's the appropriate treatment for that intersection. Given the traffic volume on Michigan, given the traffic volume on Maple, that's the appropriate treatment. So that's the reason why we're going that way. I understand people prefer maybe a four-way stop. Like I said, I kind of tell this to a lot of people, if we had a four-way stop at every intersection, we wouldn't move cars around town very well. I understand this is difficult because it's such a historical street that's been like that forever. But really, when you look at Maple, it really shouldn't be a road with no stop signs on it. So we felt like that was the appropriate treatment for that intersection based off the data. It's the first time we've gone through this as a town. I don't believe we've really done this before. Maybe we have, where we've switched the stop signs. But so it is a little bit of a change, and I think we should continue through the process of changing the stop sign the way we've intended. That would be my recommendation.
And just what would be the negative impact of creating a four-way there?
Again, as a one-off, having a four-way where maybe it shouldn't, where it doesn't need to be, isn't the end of the world. But if you kind of continue on with that approach and just putting four-way stops kind of everywhere, it could get out of hand and it could really have an impact on traffic movement in the town. So we really want to try to use the data that we have and make, appropriate decisions based off of, current guidelines and things like that.
Yeah, I understand that. I think this one's just so unique just because it is a flip of that intersection. And I only remember ever kind of making a major change once was on Bouffard. Was it Bouffard? We removed stop signs or something? Right? Yeah, we removed them, and that wasn't such a big deal because you just removed them and it allowed that flow. But this is completely changing where people are stopping. So I know a lot of the residents in that neighborhood are very concerned about what that means for, people who are maybe seniors and been doing it for years and years and years. Forget seniors, even a regular person, you're used to your drive every morning and you never stopped there before, and suddenly, did you forget, you're in your zone driving to work. So I know I've heard a lot of concern from people, more so than we do on a lot of the other topics we deal with. And I know the question was just approached was, why can't we just do the four-way instead of creating this havoc? So, Councillor Burns.
Okay, we had this problem before, and I agree with the four-way because when you're used to stopping one way and then you go the other way, there are going to be accidents there. There've been accidents already, and we did it on, would you believe, Laurier, where we had only Matchett stopped north-south. People would go through Matchett, end up on the across from the museum in the guy's front yard. And we also did it on Reham for the same reasons. Because Matchett was a two-way stop, and people would go through, and I'm sure the chief can attest to that, because he would have been around probably just starting his career. And guess what happened when we did that? It didn't meet any warrants. Council wanted it. We have not had major accidents at those corners since, where we used to get one or two a year, because someone is just going to blow right through it, and they're hitting the guy coming up 3/4 of a mile on Laurier, 3/4 of a mile and a half on Reham, and when they hit, it's not pretty, because it's not 50 kilometers. If it's 40, they're doing 70. And those accidents were, one actually on Laurier. The guy rolled the car in the guy's front yard. If you drive by today, you'll see the boulders protect him too. So I would be in favor of a four-way stop as a precaution. And I know it probably won't meet the warrants, but we can wait for a couple accidents and do it, or we can be proactive and do it now. But that's up to administration if they want to come back with a report. I don't think we should do it in isolation, but maybe we should get a report on that and then make a council decision. Nothing against your department, Jonathan. Thank you.
Councillor Carrick.
We all want four-way stops. I want them on every street if we can get them. The problem is if it doesn't meet the warrant, then we're setting ourselves up for every street in the town. Anyone wants to come complain, if it's got somewhat of a volume, we're going to have to put four-way stops. So I get the concern. It's not easy. But at the same time, why do we have warrants then? Because then we can put them up where we want, and then it's just, it's chaos. So, and quite frankly, four-way stops are tough on the environment until all electric cars like Joe. But having said that, it's all good. See, got that one in there, Joe. Well, electric cars aren't bad for four-way stops. Sorry, did I say that? I should have said that. Anyways, but my point is, and I get it, we all want it, but then we're gonna have to do it on every time we get a complaint, or we want to switch something, we have to do a four-way stop. So that's the concern, and again, you have to follow the warrants, and that's what governs what we do on the streets. And that's where I'm at. And I know it's not an easy decision, but it's change. Thank you.
Thank you. I agree with you. I know in past we always say the warrants are what we need to go off of. I just think this one situation is just so unique because we're flipping the intersection, and I think that's why it's a little bit more of a concern than, and we get people who come to us all the time asking why theirs is just a two-way stop. They want a four-way. The data doesn't show it, and then we decline them, and we have the reason to decline them. Like I said, this one to me was just very unique because of the situation and the changes that we were making to that intersection, and I thought it was important to at least bring it up and hear what council's thoughts were on it, because I don't know if we had the chance to consult with police on this specific intersection, if it's a problem intersection, or how they feel about a reversal stop signs, what kind of implications they might expect, but it was just something that, like I said, unfortunately, I received many calls and messages about, so I thought it was important to bring up this evening. Mr. Mosher, did you want to add something to that? Or?
The only item I would add, just so to try to keep our protocol, if council's looking to debate this issue, we need to get it on an agenda and perhaps get a report back from administration from that perspective.
Would that cause an issue with the current messaging that's going out to our residents now?
It would alter that messaging. We would have to extend the amount of time that it's going to be a four-way stop. I think right now it's the end of June, sometime the end of June, which is even a bit longer than I think what's outlined in the Ontario Traffic Manual, but we might have to adjust that date based on when we can get a report back to council. So, I mean, it could live as a four-way a bit longer. The longer it lives that way, it becomes, starts to have an effect on how people see it. If they see that sign there that says until this date and that keeps changing, I don't know if that's the message we want, but certainly we could try to turn it around for an upcoming council meeting, and we'd have to just slightly adjust our messaging.
Okay. So, Councillor Carrick, go ahead.
So I guess if we don't follow warrants, does it become a liability to the town? That's the question I have.
Through you, Madam Mayor, as being part of discoveries in some of our lawsuits, that information will be requested on how and when decisions were made at a particular intersection if an accident does occur. So if we are not able to produce why this is a four-way stop, that could draw in some of our liability, or at least increase our liability. Having been through it a number of times now through various other instances throughout the town, the documentation is very important that we have that in hand in order to help us through that process.
So in the same respect, having this discussion here tonight could also be part of a report if we didn't pursue it as well.
Yes, any reports, again, as long as whatever the final decision is and whatever the final outcome is how you got there is what they're going to ask for documentation on. So certainly, if it's council's direction, it's certainly your prerogative, your direction, but that is what will be produced on how this became a four-way stop, and that is not based in the data that drives those decisions. Again, the data that drive those decisions has always been Ontario traffic manuals and things of that nature, so that's what we use to make those decisions. Certainly, if council's direction is to issue or tell administration that they would like to leave this a four-way stop, certainly that will just be folded into the documentation on how this became, and in the future, if something happens, that will be what's produced as our background or our information on how this became a four-way stop. So,
Okay. Questions, comments? Any? Councillor Charlie?
Thank you. We're talking about my neighborhood, and I know what the streets are like. Maple is a freeway, and I'm very concerned that once the four-way comes off Michigan, that Michigan Avenue is going to become a freeway, and there's a school right in there, and I'm very concerned about the kids. We're taking the sign down June the 26th, according to the signs that are there. So people are going to have all summer to race up and down Michigan, and I think that that's going to be an issue. Like I said, Maple is a freeway right now with the stop sign on Maple. It'll be interesting to see how that's impacted, but that's just kind of my thought on it right now. And yeah, I'm getting lots of calls because I live in the neighborhood. So people are saying they want a four-way, and I said, we have to go through the proper channels.
Okay, so we need to make a decision whether we just move on from the subject, or if we want to see anything done, then we would have to request a report from administration. If anybody's interested, we would need a motion to do so.
I'd make a motion to request a report on the four-way stop or two-way stop from administration, and hopefully in that report we would have a history of accidents or whatever's occurred on that street, maybe the number of speeding tickets, a whole background report to at least document whatever decision that council does make, pro or con.
So moved by Councillor Burns, support by Councillor Desjardins. Deputy Mayor?
Just a question, Your Worship, and maybe you or the CAO can answer. I'm all for reports, but as Mr. Osborne says, we've got timelines, we've got messaging. How is this going to affect that? The last thing I want to do, in all good intention, because I believe that everybody here is good intentioned, is confuse the public or confuse an issue or take steps back. So I'm fully in supportive of a report as long as, and that's why I'm looking to either Mr. Militia or Mr. Osborne to see if it's going to delay, disrupt, confuse, any of that. Through you, Your Worship.
Mr. Osborne?
I believe I could probably have a report for the June 27th meeting, which is not too far off of the date that's on the sign of June 26th, so we wouldn't be too far out of what we've put up there.
Yeah, I would imagine that given our scheduling, we probably, again, as much as this is an important issue, we have lots of important issues that we're trying to schedule appropriately. And so if we can get it for the last meeting of June, it may be the first meeting in July, which would effectively extend that four-way stop period for probably another month, if I'm understanding it correctly. So as long as we don't go too far beyond that, I think that that's somewhat reasonable at that point.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor of receiving that report? And that's carried. Okay, notices of motion. Closed session, nothing to report. So our confirmatory bylaw, that the confirmatory bylaw 8799 be given a first, second, and third reading and finally passed. Moved by Councillor Reno, support Councillor Burns. All in favor? Schedule of meetings are attached. Sorry, that's carried. Schedule of meetings are attached, and thank you for joining us this evening. Meeting adjourned.